Welcome to this new demonstration where I will be talking about how to design watches. Designing watches is very interesting because you learn a lot in terms of drawing in the top view and also being able to transfer your design into a three-dimensional drawing. The watch is actually one of those objects that can be explained simply with the drawing of a flat top view, three-dimensional top view. But then if you want to sell your design, it's also very important to show a three-dimensional view. So basically what is a watch in the top view? It's a rectangle, which is basically the strap, and then on top of it you will be designing a circle or a form that can be more interesting, maybe non-symmetric, or it can be a circle containing something creative, like a heart in this case, if you are designing maybe for the fashion industry, or like I said, something kind of more complicated, more intriguing, with a pretty edgy non-symmetric design. It really depends on the client, it really depends on your mood and who you are designing for. So again, just sketch some simple forms, make sure you have a good line weight, a good line quality, and you can create easily like a quick ideation page that you will be saving and present at the end together with a three-dimensional three-quarter view drawing. Trying to understand what is a watch, how do you design a watch in three-quarter view? Basically you need to design cylinders. There is a horizontal cylinder, which would be the strap, and intersecting with the horizontal cylinder there would be a vertical cylinder, which is basically the hard case, the one containing all the movements. So again, two cylinders, one compenetrating the other. On the side of the case containing the stitches, you have also another little cylinder, which is the one that you use to control the hours and the minutes. You can position the bigger rounded case on different positions, but make sure that you use the technique that we have learned for designing wheels. Basically, starting from the center, you will design an axis. You will use that axis to place a 90-degree line, which is the one that you use to place correctly your major ellipse. And then from there you just divide that space into areas, like I'm doing here with the red, and you will be using those sectors or those segments to place the numbers if you need to. This technique is very interesting because it's the same as the one that I have explained when I talk about projection of circles on different planes in perspective. And so this basically what is interesting is that when you project ellipses, it's having the right angle is absolutely important, and it makes a big difference at the end of in creating a drawing that looks three-dimensional and correct. Another important thing that, in my opinion, has to be considered when designing a watch is that when you do the three-quarter view, it should be very important that you show the inside of the watch as much as possible. So, for example, if you keep it very narrow, like I'm doing here, it's good to describe the design of the watch in terms of overall thickness, but if you really want to sell your design, it would be better to put the camera a little bit higher. You can also eventually consider to show how is the strap in a perspective like this, that is kind of narrow. So this is something that has to be kept into consideration. Now I'm going to start a drawing where I will basically show how to build the design of a watch using a 3/4 perspective. So it's a three-dimensional view where we see a little bit of the top of the object, but also a little bit of the side. So this type of drawing works perfectly well together with the flat top view of the watch. So combining the two really gives the opportunity to the designer of creating an interesting composition. At this stage, I'm basically just sketching around the possibilities, keeping the drawing very rough and dirty. I have decided that this is going to be a very traditional watch in terms of design. So again, there is going to be a cylindrical strap, and on top of it there would be a set of ellipses that are actually circles in perspective. So I have decided to put a vertical cylinder on top of my strap, and so it's a very simple design. Basically it's a conical form on top of my strap, and then inside of it you can see two rounded elements and a couple of polygonal forms that probably will receive some digital displays inside. So line quality is very important. So what you saw was a very rough edition drawing that is now being perfectioned with the darker lines. This is the so-called line weight or line quality. Like I said, I decided to open up the design with the design of the strap, so it looks a little bit more fun and interesting. And now what I do is just refine the design, going back on my lines with a thicker pen. Usually for drawing like this, I use 3 pixels of width of my pen, and then I go back, maybe increasing to 4. Little bit of erasing where I have major mistakes. And then I just keep refining my line work with more deeper, more darker lines. And the goal is to create a drawing that is enjoyable and understandable also without the rendering. Because if I do not have the time to render everything, I should still be able to deliver an idea that is looking three-dimensional, easy to be understood in terms of where the different planes are, easy to be understood in terms of proportions of the parts, distances among the parts, and then I keep adding, crucial details like the stitches in the center of the watch. And like I said, this is probably the most important part of the design. I wouldn't ever buy a watch if I wouldn't be able to see what happens inside of it. A watch is like a little treasure, contains a lot of mystery, a lot of very refined detailed little components that interact together, and the many details, the more details that I have, the bigger is going to be the perception of an object that is expensive. It's an object that most of the time it's a status symbol. A good watch can really tell the story of the owner. This one that I'm doing is basically pretty simple, clean design with that doesn't pretend to be luxurious. I choose it to keep it very simple, to basically show the basics of approaching a design like this. On the side, I have finally decided to add a little button, and here I duplicate the button on the other side. And here I think I'm doing the most interesting part of this demonstration, which is describing the design with the use of parallel lines that are placed on top of the drawing in a way that has to help and maximize the perception of the form. So all these lines basically follow the ideal section, the hypothetical section that I have in mind for each surface. So for example, if I have a conical negative form, those lines will try to show exactly what is the angle that the surface has. It's sometimes very interesting, very useful to also sketch the position of where the branding would go. And now that I have a cool drawing, I'm ready to start the rendering. Remember, we never start the rendering without having decided where the light source will be. And that big arrow on top left that you see is telling us that the light source is coming behind the viewer from top left. According to that, I just sketch a very quick, rough form for my shadow. And now that I will start rendering it, I prefer to sketch some quick paths that will contain the marker, the colors, filling the shadow. So I'm using a basically a simple grayscale, keeping it probably as dark as possible under the focal point. And of course I want the focal point in this case to be the center of the object, because that's the part of the object containing the biggest amount of details. I keep adding other forms in terms of paths that I will use to build a very simple grayscale. I call this technique the 1, 2, and 3 technique, which means basically that the number 1 surfaces are those that are receiving the biggest amount of light, so I don't put the grayscale on these. Number 2 means usually those surfaces that receive a little bit of darker tones, a little bit of grayscale, like going from 20% to 40%. And number 3 are those surfaces that are facing towards the shadow, and those look way darker. In this case, I have basically finished the grayscale. Now I have just decided to imagine that all the inside of my watch is basically a dark carbon fiber set of components. So I just applied a solid grayscale that, because there is all the grain that underneath, is still let the object, the work that I did underneath to come through, so it looks three-dimensional. So if you draw this digitally, it's very important to keep the opacity not 100%. I usually work at keeping it at 70%. So if I work very lightweight, I can have the different layers breathing one through the other. I apply some color, yellow, and now I'm going to work on the thickness of the strap, and I'll make it with the same yellow but with a little different tone. And then that same yellow is going to be applied to some of the details that I have, like the little indicators and probably the major indicators. A little bit of 1, 2, and 3 on 2 and 3 gradient that are just going to give the overall drawing a good sense of three-dimensionality. And then I will be adding, working, the idea is just to forget just the technique, and you get to a point where you just enjoy what you're doing and you try to give it as much form as you can, depending also on how much time that you have. Like in this case, this was a demo that was done during the class hours, and I only had few minutes, so you cannot spend 3 hours on a nice drawing, so you have to simplify as much as possible. But the idea is to really communicate basically a direction to go. This is of course a demonstration that has which goal is that to indicate how to approach the design of a watch. And of course, the more time you have, the better it is. I'm also now adding, if you see, some selection that will receive some white airbrush that is going to communicate that those areas are very reflective, so probably they contain a dark glass that probably covers some digital displays. And the technique to communicate glass is usually that of adding on a flat surface covered with either black or grayscale, adding these white forms that are shaped following the section of the surfaces. This is really an effective good way to communicate glass. Then, if you can see, I'm adding blue color on the inner negative cone. That blue is going to be darker on that part of the negative cone that doesn't receive a lot of light. The other part that receives a direct light, so that blue is going to be lighter. And controlling this property, of course, it lets you build, very easily a lot of form. For the outer positive cone, I have decided to imagine that to be kind of chromish. Chrome is all about high contrast, so black and white, a little bit of airbrush, black markers, and that's basically what I did. And you notice the direction of my strokes is basically following the technique used for working on cones. That's why those lines are tilted to that specific angle. I am going to basically, the demo is pretty much done. I'm going to add a little bit of gradient on the top surface because I want it to be a little bit more three-dimensional, and I keep that top surface lighter towards the viewer. And then the last touch was to build a line, a solid contour line that is supposed to describe where the glass ends, the covering glass of the watch. And then I duplicated the same line. I created a white line that is going to basically communicate the cut line. Last touch will be to just design a nice reflection on top of it, and we are good to go with our little quick rendering.